Hello, this is Antoine Garth from Garthastro Healing Arts, and today's topic is astrology of the soul. So this is something I've been working with for quite a while, probably since the mid or late 90s. And I originally got this information from an author from the 15th century called Antonio de Montuomo. He had a very specific technique, and that was how I kind of entered into reading charts. That was how I got into reading charts, was through this particular technique. But as of late, I have discovered another technique, or a similar technique but different, by an earlier author by the name of Guido Bonatti, that I'd like to share. And one of the reasons that I'm interested in this technique is because I really am interested in the idea of the esoteric aspect of soul, and the fact that these particular ancient astrologers really believed that soul could be quantified and found in the chart. And as a result, that means that those particular planets that represent soul, things that are happening to those planets in the chart, aspects that are being made, conditions that they may be in, by essential dignity, et cetera, things that we'll all talk about, all of those things may actually then end up having implications for what we are actually here to do, what our sole purpose is. Now, I want to talk about purpose for just 1 second. What I tend to find is that when people are thinking about their purpose, they're usually thinking about something exalted, something like, oh, well, what is my career supposed to be? That will be my purpose. Or am I supposed to save Jewish children like Schindler did, or something that's a really exalted purpose? Not everybody has an exalted purpose. More than likely, everybody has a purpose, but I think that not every purpose is an exalted purpose. And pretty much what we're doing in our life is kind of what we're here to do, is my opinion. And so purpose can be very, very intimate and small, or intimate and domestic even, right? So if you are let's say you're the designated child to take care of your mother when she grows old, that's a purpose. That might not be anything that you want to do. That might create a lot of different problems, but that becomes a purpose of yours, whether or not it's your purpose that you yourself decided on. So when I look at purpose in an astrology chart, I think a lot about what exactly is there, because what is there is what we're doing, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. So let's go to our technique and get an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're starting with this idea of astrology of the soul, and finding the soul and its purpose. So there's one major conclusion about this, that the soul can be found in the astrology chart. So the soul can be found. That's what we're dealing with and looking at. Now, this all comes from Aristotle. So it comes from Greek philosophy and from Aristotle from his De Anima. And we see here that Aristotle demarcated the soul into 3 developmental sections, right? Because we're talking about consciousness ultimately. So we're not talking about a thing, we are talking about a thing, but we're talking about a sentient thing. And so he basically created gradations of sentience, shall we say. So on the first level and the highest level, I'm doing it as a hierarchy in this particular instance, the rational or intellectual, which is responsible for the formulation of thoughts and the ability to put that which is perceived by the sensible soul into words or thoughts. The second type of soul, or the second level of soul, is the sensory or perceptive, which includes desires and appetite. So that represents the instinctual in this particular aspect of soul, as dictated by the senses, certain emotions, and movement. So the sensory involves movement, involves being ambulatory. And then the vegetative, which is responsible for growth and the taking in of nourishment. So astrologically, Montuomo, who I was talking about originally, he gave a different different planet for each of these. And we're going to see that it's been conflated a little bit in this Bonatti technique that we're about to look at. But all three of these aspects of soul are represented by a planet. What is soul? Soul is the substance that corresponds to the definitive formula of a thing's essence. That's me paraphrasing Aristotle. So soul is substance that corresponds to the definitive formula of a thing's essence. So soul represents the essential whatness of a body. Astrologically, soul represents the essential who-ness of the native, the essence. It's the definitive essence of the person. So the soul is the definitive essence of the body, or also of the person, shall we say, if the person is to include the body, right? And then astrologically, the soul would represent the essential who-ness of that same native. So this is also from Aristotle. Suppose the eye were an animal, sight would be its soul. For as the pupil plus the power of sight constitutes the eye, so the soul plus the body constitutes the animal. So if the eye is an animal, then the soul, its ensoulment, sight is its ensoulment. So sight is how it is, its, what did we say? Its definitive essence is sight. Now, of course, a blind person, the soul is gone from its eyes, right? So basically, if the eyes lose the ability to see, then that soul is gone, so to speak. Okay, so we start first with the vegetative soul. We're only going to do a very short amount of time on this Aristotle part, and then we're going to get right to it. So as you can see, the vegetative soul is represented by the moon. Now, Montuomo gave this to the ascendant and the lord of the ascendant. So gave this to but he also gave it to the moon as well. So the moon, remember, is co-ruler in everything. She's co-ruler in all matters because she is the mediatrix between the celestial realm and the earthly realm. So she basically transmits everything down to earth. And so that's where the understanding of the moon as changeable, as Lady Luck, as luck be a lady tonight, and snake eyes versus double sixes. That's all aspects of how the moon operates. Sometimes you get it good, sometimes you get it bad, or I got it bad and that ain't good, or not, that kind of thing. Anything. So anyway, sorry, that was my digression. But vegetative soul, the moon. And that's, I just went to kind of a circular kind of thing, which is very lunar. So that makes perfect sense. What has soul in it differs from what has not, in that the former displays life. So there's a rather a long list of the things that display life, but in this particular case, we're just looking at the vegetative signs of life, and the vegetative sign of life is the nutritive, which is the ability to grow as a result of taking in nourishment. So I'm using a baby as an example, as a newborn baby as an example. When the newborn is born, it can't really move, it can't really do anything but cry to tell you that it's hungry, or that it's wet. And basically all it does for the first few months is eat, right? And eat and grow. And so that's this nutritive aspect. Okay, so sensory signs of life, the sensory. The moon is also the sensory. She is also the primary significator for the sensory. That means that, once again, remember, she's co-ruler of everything. So she's how everything kind of comes to be as it is. So the sensory soul, the moon, sensory signs of life are the sensory, which is the senses, right? The use of the five senses to perceive one's environment. The appetitive, the realm of the senses, gives birth to appetite and desire. The locomotive, the ability to move, including complex movement. And as we get into complex movement, then we move out of the sensory and into the rational, because if we're talking about a dancer or a yogi, then we're talking about highly intelligent movement and applying intelligence to movement, right? So even that can go into another level. But as far as the sensory is concerned, this issue of the five senses and how we encounter life as a result of our own five senses. So the taste that we develop, the things we like and we don't like, the way that we make observations about our reality, our autonomic responses in our body that we don't really have much control over, that are involuntary, sensory. So all of that is on this sensory side, the appetitive. And so we can say, once again, as far as using our baby as our example, now baby is starting to move. Baby is starting to learn to walk, and baby walks to the stove and touches it while it's hot and burns their hand. That's a discovery of the senses. That's a discovery of the sense of touch. And so that's what's going on here with the sensory soul. It's the instinctual. It's what baby finds out they like, what baby finds out they don't really like, what baby, as they amble through their environment. So as they start to encounter their environment through being ambulatory. The rational soul, the Mercury is the primary significator of the rational soul. So that means that rational signs of life are thinking, discrimination, and perception, right? It includes perception, but is not limited to perception. Remember, animals can perceive, but only humans that we know of can formulate thoughts. So really thinking is about formulating thoughts, and discrimination is about how we formulate thoughts that discriminate between different issues or things. Speech, obviously, opinion, criticism, commentary, that's all an aspect of discrimination. Problem solving, mastery, skill, once again, thinking, discrimination are all involved in this aspect of the rational soul. Mercury is the primary ruler of the rational soul. So we just got into that, and now we are going to look at how to actually find the soul in the chart. So we got the three levels, right? Mercury is the rational soul. The moon is both the sensory and the vegetative. Now, in the Montuomo, this was the ascendant. Matter of fact, it was the ascendant and the moon. So it still is pretty consistent. But as we come forward, now we look at actually how to find or what to be looking at when we're looking at our significators for soul. So the first thing we're looking at is consider the condition of the moon and Mercury, right? So we were just talking about the moon is the significator for the vegetative soul and for the perceptive or sensory soul, and that Mercury is the significator for the rational soul. So right, there are three tiers of soul, or there are three expressions of soul, three hierarchical expressions, shall we say. Note the signs they occupy. Okay, so what signs are the moon and Mercury in? Find the planetary rulers of those signs. And then note any aspects involving all of these significators that I just mentioned. So that means any aspects that Moon and Mercury are involved in, and we're really especially looking for applying aspects. So if you don't already know about applying versus separating, we'll talk a little bit about that when we look at some charts. And then consider the angle and their lord, or the angles and their lords. And we'll do that kind of quickly. I think that'll be a very interesting thing for the two charts that we've decided to look at. So let's just look at the list one more time, go through the list one more time, and then we're going to go through the list, all of the aspects of the list with two charts. So we're going to consider the condition of the moon and Mercury. We're going to note the signs they occupy. We're going to find the planetary ruler of those signs. And then we're going to note any aspects involving those significators, right? So if the moon and Mercury, let's say the moon and Mercury are both in Sagittarius, that means Jupiter is the ruler of that sign. So we would note anything going on with Jupiter. We would note anything going on with the moon and Mercury, right? And anything going on between the moon and Mercury. We're going to talk about finding the soul, S-O-L-E, significator for the solar, or the solitary, the number one significator in many cases. Okay, so consider the angles and their lords is the very last one. And from here, we're going to go to our chart. This is Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald is considered possibly the greatest non-classical singer of the 20th century. And what's very interesting to me about Ella Fitzgerald is that she is, especially in the business, as far as the business of music was concerned, and people in the business and other singers. If you asked other singers, of course, this is during a particular time, right? Ella Fitzgerald's born in 1917, starts in the 30s, and then ends in the 90s, in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. But throughout that career, especially after the 50s, if you asked anybody who was the greatest singer, people would tell you it was Ella Fitzgerald. As a matter of fact, I worked in a retirement home. I worked in a retirement home as a yoga teacher, and we were talking about singing. And one of my students just came up out of nowhere, grabbed a chair, came up out of nowhere, sat down and said, "I don't know what you guys are talking about. The greatest singer of all time is Ella Fitzgerald." And then he went on to tell us about this fabulous concert he went to, a very intimate little concert he went to. But that's the kind of accolade that people would usually give for her. And as a matter of fact, the entrance in one of her concerts, a person said, or the MC says, "The greatest thing there is." So to receive those kinds of accolades, to have that kind of respect, etc., that's a really kind of major thing. That's a really, that's a major life purpose, life path, right? So this is an exalted life path. This is an exalted life purpose. Let's see if the soul reflects it. Okay, so first we're looking at the moon and Mercury. The moon is in Gemini at 26 degrees. Mercury is at 25 degrees of Taurus. Notice that the Mercury is in the 10th house. Okay, so that's something we would be noticing. Secondly, notice that Mercury is in Taurus, which is the sign of the throat, sign that rules the throat. It's also a Venus sign, which rules music and art and beauty and love, all of the things that we tend to know Venus for. And so notice also then, as a result, that the Mercury is the ruler of this moon, right? Remember, the first thing we did was we want to look at the two planets and their condition, what's going on with them, right? And so we've noticed, here's this Mercury here. The closest thing to him is Jupiter. Doesn't look like anything else is going on. A square to Uranus a little bit, but essentially that's a separating aspect, which we'll talk about. And then, of course, we have this moon who is ruled by this Mercury, right? So Mercury, one of the things about Mercury is youthfulness and the young. Right? Mercury rules children and young people. And so one of the things about Ella Fitzgerald is she started at a very young age. She started around the time she was 18, 19 in the music business, and she always retained this youthful kind of sound. She was kind of known for being kind of this, even though she looked more like kind of an earth mother, she was known for kind of this kind of eternal youthfulness, especially in her singing and her energy, the energy of her singing, etc. So a very interesting thing that this Mercury, so angular, right? The 10th house is an angle. The angles push things forward. The angles do what we call advance things. So this Mercury is advanced, and this Mercury is advancing in Taurus, in the musical Venus's sign representing the throat. And look, Mercury is also the ruler of the second house, and the second house also represents the throat. And so here the throat is at the 10th house cusp, right? And so once again, what we're trying to see if we can find the soul, does that also mean that it implies that this is what the soul is here to do? In this case, it looks like it is, right? A Mercury here, very much in the 10th house, with a Jupiter as well, right on the cusp. We know Jupiter enlarges things, makes things bigger. Also, this Mercury is on this fixed star called Algol, and a fixed star of the first magnitude. So we know that fixed stars of the first magnitude have a tendency to really push things forward. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about how to find these things, what to be looking for when we look for these things. As far as the moon is concerned, the moon is in the sign of Mercury. So Mercury ends up being kind of what we would, so Venus, let's do this now. The moon is in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. So the primary significators are the Moon and Mercury, but the next level of significators are Mercury and Venus. Now, Mercury is in Taurus, which means that ultimately Venus is the main significator for the soul in this particular chart. And there's a very interesting thing happening with this Venus. So when a planet is in conjunction to the sun, it usually is in a state that we call combustion, which is a very, very malefic state for that planet. Basically, it's being burned by the excessive heat of the sun. It's completely weakened, usually not a good position for a planet. However, when the planet gets to what is called the heart of the sun, which is from 16 minutes to the exact degree and minute of the conjunction, it's in something called Cazimi. And I've always been skeptical about whether or not Cazimi was actually a thing. But Ella Fitzgerald's career, I mean, she came from nothing. When she was discovered, she was a street urchin running numbers for some bookie. I mean, she could have so easily ended up just in the system or in jail or whatever, but ends up becoming one of the greatest singers of all time, the greatest singer of the entire 20th century, as far as I'm concerned, and many. Okay, so this is what I'm kind of saying is when we get to the real nitty gritty of things, it looks like the Venus is this Cazimi Venus. Cazimi is supposed to actually create like a supernatural power to this particular planet, to the planet that's in connection to the sun. And so this Cazimi with Sun and Venus, Venus is the ruler of the 10th house. 10th house is, we think of it now as career, but it was called kingship and kingdom. The 10th house was the house of kingdom and kingship. And Ella Fitzgerald, sang before kings and queens, was touted for kings and queens. There's a great story of when she meets Marilyn Monroe for the first time and they both ask for each other's autograph at the same time. And this is when Marilyn Monroe is the most famous person in the world. I mean, these kinds of things, this is that kind of career. So it's very possible that, yes, indeed, when we actually find the soul, that we are able to maybe find the purpose. Now, this is a very, very excellent example of how easy this particular one is to see. Okay, here we are with Jeffrey Dahmer, completely different chart. Okay, completely different chart, right? Jeffrey Dahmer, also very famous person, many people will know, but infamous as a famous serial killer, and for the savagery with which he killed his victims, and for the savage things that he did to the bodies after they were dead or while they were being drugged, how he drugged them and dismembered their bodies and things of that nature, right? So this is a completely different chart. Look, the Venus is in Taurus though again, but still, this is a completely different chart. So we're looking for soul. So this is a completely different type of soul, right? This type of soul wants something completely different, right? Has a different purpose altogether, right? So once again, does finding the soul in the chart imply the purpose? I think it may. Here we are. The moon is in Aries. The Mercury is in Gemini. Aries is ruled by Mars, who is also in Aries. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, right? Mercury is in Gemini. Now, what's interesting about this for me is this. Two things, obviously, or a few things. One is that the moon is exactly opposing the ascendant, right? So it's going to be projecting itself across. So there's that aspect. We know already that Aries is the sign of the ram. But there's some other things that are interesting about this. Aries is the masculine diurnal expression of Mars. Mars has two expressions. He has a masculine diurnal and he has a feminine nocturnal. Scorpio is his feminine nocturnal sign. The masculine diurnal aspect of Mars is hot and dry. Fire is hot and dry. It's a fire sign. Fire is hot and dry. Hot and dry is called the choleric temperament. The choleric temperament is the shoot now, ask questions later temperament. The choleric temperament is the hot-headed, blow my top, punch me in the face, get into get into fights, altercations, arguments. That kind of choleric gets heated. Choleric temperament gets heated. Choleric temperament is heated. Now, one of the things about this chart is now the Mars, of course, is the ruler of the seventh. The moon is in the seventh. We know that almost everything about Jeffrey Dahmer's trigger to kill involved sexual desire, Which aspect of soul involves desire? The moon. It involved desire to connect with someone else. He called many of these victims beloveds, and he kept their body parts because he wanted them close to him, if you remember. So here we've got the soul of desire, shall we say. We've got the ensoulment of desire right here on the cusp of the seventh, right on the exact cusp of the seventh. Right. So it's all about others. It's all about trying to have that intimacy. Right. It's this warped idea of intimacy that involves cholera. It's love in the time of cholera, shall we say. This is love in the time of cholera. And cholera is deadly. Right? Love in the time of cholera, and cholera is deadly. That's what we will call the Jeffrey Dahmer chart right now. Love in the time of cholera and in the time of deadly cholera. Okay, so that is the sensitive soul and also the vegetative. So the vegetative and the sensitive. So what this person is taking in to grow, and what this person is taking in to grow, what this person is doing to experience all of these different sensory things, and desire leads to deadly cholera. This is, of course, in hindsight that we know this. The other thing that we have is the Mercury. So remember, that's our rational soul. That's our rational mind. That's our thinking. That's our cogitation. That's our skill. That's our instruction manual reading. It's that's the Mercury. It's our technical skill, a technical ability, our rational ability. Mercury is in his own sign, but one of the things that's interesting is that Mercury is applying to a sextile to Mars. Now, we're going to talk about now applying and separating. So in order for a planet to be applying to an aspect of another planet, it must be a faster planet, and it must be in a lower degree of longitude in the sign it is occupying. The fastest planets, or from fast to slow, is Moon, then Mercury, then Venus, then Sun, then then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. We're just using the 7 right now. We're not looking at the others, but we may as well. Uranus, then Neptune, then Pluto. Pluto is the very slowest, but we're really only interested in these 7 right now. So the fastest is the Moon. Next to her is Mercury. Mercury is at 6 degrees of Gemini. Mars is at 8 degrees of Aries. So Mercury at 6 degrees still has 2 degrees to get to the exact, what we call partile, sextile of Mars. Okay, so that is an applying aspect. If Mercury were at 10 degrees and Mars were at 8, Mercury will have already left, and that would be a separating aspect. Okay, so we have this very interesting applying aspect between the rational soul and the planet that rules the sensitive soul, or the sensory soul. So we've got the underbelly of the sensory soul working in tandem, in very close tandem with the rational soul, right? So there's the cholera. Here's the source of the cholera, and with the rational soul. And look at how the rational soul is in the 8th house. So once again, we're noticing that even by house placement, right? Even by house placement, especially, well, I mean, house placement is one of the things we end up knowing, right? And by what is being ruled. So wait, let's see what the planets rule. The moon rules the 10th house. So that's actions by which we are known, right? That's the stuff by which we're known. Mercury rules the 9th house. That's knowledge. The 9th house is called originally the house of knowledge. And one of the things that he did was he used all of this different knowledge to get rid of bodies, to preserve bodies, to cook bodies, to he basically, all of these elaborate chemicals that he used and all of these things, these techniques that he basically kind of learned in order to kind of work with, I guess, render. It's almost like a body rendering type service, but to render the bodies that he was interested in, of the victims that he was working with. So it looks like maybe it's true. It looks like maybe we can come to these conclusion that by finding these significators for soul in the chart, we then also find indicators of what the chart is going to be about, what the soul is going to be about. Note, I mean, remember, the 8th house is the house of death. We like to think of it as the house of love, and or sex, rather, right? It includes sex. And we could say that this is a sexualized 8th, right? Because the ruler of the 8th is right there on the cusp, right? So we have another one. So we've got Moon right on the cusp of the 7th. We've got the ruler of the ascendant right on the cusp of the 8th, right? So both of those are such important planets as far as a person's identity. Those are two of the most, I mean, and obviously the Mercury too, right? Moon, so ruler of the ascendant, Moon, and Mercury, those are the most important planets. I mean, why didn't I say Sun? Even though, because the Sun's there, it's not as important, in my opinion, as far as traditional astrology is concerned. I know that in Western astrology, it's kind of a be-all, I mean, modern Western, it's a kind of be-all, end-all. So that is the difference with what's going on in soul. We've got this particular soul is very interested in expressing cholera on others, or with / on others. And there's an underground aspect to this cholera. Remember, so 8th house, the planet in the 8th is aspecting the planet, this planet with the 7th. So the planet in the 8th is connected to a planet with the 7th, and that's the ruler of the 7th, that is. And so that in and of itself kind of connects death and others, or death and the need for love, or things of that nature. And we know that Mercury is common to good and bad, and that Mercury-Mars conjunction especially can tend to represent what we call the highwayman or criminal, or the Mercury-Mars opposition, or the Mercury-Mars conjunction can represent criminal behavior. And so certainly this Mercury-Mars, and look at how they're both so strong. Mercury is in his own sign, he's in Gemini, and Mars is in his own sign. So these two are working really, really strongly together, doing their thing. You know, it's a real partnership. It's a real partnership in crime. So this is a partnership in crime during the time of love. During the time of love, during the time of cholera, or something. But it's a partnership in crime while love and cholera. So that is my presentation on astrology of the soul, finding the soul, finding purpose. It looks like if you can look for this Mercury and the Moon, you can pretty much find what the purpose of the life is going to be. So thank you so much for joining me, and we will have more of the same. Now, this particular information is part of a larger medieval astrology course that I'm doing, that I've done on YouTube. It's available on YouTube for free, and you can certainly avail yourself to it. It goes all the way from the very beginning to, to all kinds of different types of delineation. You can find the link to that in the description. Please also, if you like this, subscribe, like, etc. You know the drill. Thank you so much.